This video is for educational use only. Our group is allowing our instructor, namely Mr. Roldan Ordines, to use this as educational material. Good day, sir, and good day, cadets. On behalf of my group mates, allow me to introduce myself. I am Deck Cadet Masbang Rosemary Guy to welcome you to our report entitled Global Demography, Global Migration, Global Citizenship, Human Trafficking, and Human Rights Migration, presenting the Group 4. For the repertoire, first, explain the theory of the demographic transition as it affects global population, to be discussed by Deck Cadet Pahang Vince Marian A. Second, analyze the political, economic, cultural, and social factors underlying the global movements of people and display first-hand knowledge experience of OFWs, to be discussed by Deck Cadet Panoy Sean Christian. Third, articulate a personal definition of global citizenship and appreciate the ethical obligation of global citizenship, to be discussed by Deck Cadet Matis John Mark. Fourth, what is global migration in contemporary world, to be discussed by Deck Cadet Gloria John Polan. Fifth, what are the 4 types of global migration, to be discussed by Deck Cadet Chairman Christian B. Sixth, why there is global migration, to be discussed by Deck Cadet Kilat Keith Joseph. Seventh, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the sending and the receiving countries, by yours truly, Deck Cadet Masbang Rosemary Guy. 8. What is human trafficking, to be discussed by Deck Cadet Baga Christian Mark. 9. What are the 3 elements of human trafficking, to be discussed by Deck Cadet Chairman Cliff Roger R. And lastly, what is the current state of the human trafficking in the Philippines, by Deck Cadet Chairman John Lloydan. For the learning objectives, first, learn the demographic transitional theory as it affects global population. Second, know the importance of political, economic, cultural, and social factors underlying global movements of people and display first-hand knowledge of the experiences of OFWs. Third, determine global citizenship and the ethical obligations of global citizenship. Fourth, have knowledge what is global migration in a contemporary world. And lastly, identify the advantages and disadvantages of the sending and the receiving countries in human trafficking and human rights in migration.
Demographic transition theory and its effects global population. The demographic transition theory studies the relation between economic development and population growth. The theory tells us that the population of any region changes from high births and high deaths to low births and low deaths as societies progresses from the rural agrarian and illiterate to urban industrial and illiterate society. 5 stages of demographics theory. The first stage or stage of high birth rate and high death rate. In the first stage, the country is at a low level of economic development. Agriculture is the main occupation of the people. The standard of living of the people is low. The status of a country is backward, and the majority of the people live in the countryside areas. The society is very simple with modest means of economic development. People are underdeveloped and backward and live in dirty surroundings. Facilities like banking, modern education, transport, commerce, and etc. are not even at the initial stage of development. The birth rate is very high because people are not educated about population control methods. A family with more children is regarded as a prosperous family. Due to illiteracy, ignorance, and various misconceptions, the birth rate is not in control. Due to more population but fewer resources, the availability of food is very low, which causes a high death rate also. The death rate is high because of a lack of medical facilities, epidemics, famines, and illiteracy. The birth rate is high because of social and economic reasons or stable population. Second stage or stage of high birth rate and low death rate or stage of population explosion. In this stage, The birth rate is high, but the death rate is low. It results in a high growth rate of the population. In this stage, income begins to rise and economic activities expand. On account of better health facilities and a nourishing diet, the death rate falls rapidly. Agriculture and industry starts developing, which leads to the development of the tertiary sector. Also, basic facilities like food, cloth, and shelter are getting more and better. Both quantitative and qualitative aspects are taken into consideration. The modern medicinal techniques are helping in declining the death rate, but the birth rate is more or less at the same pace. Due to more employment opportunities, people are not ready to reduce childbirth. Prevailing social customs and beliefs about childbirth are deep-rooted. Therefore, in this stage, the economy is getting adequate but with a population explosion. Third stage or stage of declining birth rate and low death rate. In the third stage, declining birth rate and low death rate lead to low population growth. Along with the economic development of the country, structural changes in the economy begin to take place. A large population begins to reside in urban areas. People start considering large families is a liability. Consequently, the birth rate begins to fall. After a large growth in the population now, people start using various contraceptives method for birth control. Birth rate declines with more rapid decline in the death rate. Masses are unwilling to favor the concepts of large families. Due to education, people living in urban areas become more active and learn about the difficulties of having more children. Now, the population is growing but at a diminishing rate. Fourth stage or stage of low birth rate and low death rate. In the fourth stage, a low birth rate and a low death rate lead to population stabilization. In this stage, because of rapid economic development, the standard of living of the people becomes very high. Due to this, the standard of living rises with more economic and social development. Superstitions are being rejected by the people and the nuclear family is a priority now. Sources of income become available, but expenses of various facilities like health, education, transport, etc. also rise. Men and women indulge in several family planning schemes. Now, the population is growing less comparatively stable or slow population increase. In the last stage, both fertility and mortality decline considerably. The population is either stable or grows slowly. The population becomes urbanized, literate, and has the high technical know-how, and deliberately controls the family size. This shows that human beings are extremely flexible and are able to adjust their fertility. It results in low population growth. Such a situation is regarded as a matter of concern in any developed country.
There are many existing reasons or factors which influence the movement of people globally. These factors include political, economic, cultural, social, and even physical reasons, as well as the subsets or combination with these particular reasons. For instance, migration due to political reasons may include cultural reasons as well, such as religious persecution. Most migration in human history has been group migration, but the present-day globalization has changed that, except for those who are displaced by disasters or the effect of climate change. Most people now move individually or in family units, and the reasons for moving are due largely to economic factors, which offers better opportunities. Modern communication and transportation systems allow immigrants to easily maintain cultural ties with their communities of origin. So, there are political factors that cause people to move from their home country onto another country. Some reasons are mainly due to war, persecution, the absence of political rights, and policy changes. However, that is not only the case, because for instance, migration, due to political reasons, may also include cultural reasons and social reasons, such as religious persecution, ethnic cleansing, slavery in some distinct places, and also famine. In social factors, it includes the seek for peace, freedom, sustenance, and pleasure. Since family disruption and social and domestic violence are increasing, that is why social factor exists. Nonetheless, the most predominant reason for the global movement is due to economic reasons. As the world changes and develops into something greater, people tend to move in certain places which offers better opportunities. Being an overseas Filipino worker takes a lot of courage. One has to work miles away from their families to earn for a living. The money that they earn abroad cannot equally suffice how much they miss and long for their family. There are common challenges that the OFWs experiences abroad. Those are homesickness, which has been the biggest challenge of most OFW. It is distressing when they miss important events, special occasions, and not seeing their kids grow up. Another thing is the communication gap and cultural differences. It is common that they should also deal and communicate with locales, adapting to new environment and people. Learning language and their culture may take a while and can be exhausting. Other challenges include financial and maltreatment or other possible risks. Most Filipinos think that working abroad will earn them big money, but sometimes they don't receive the high income that they expected. Also, we have heard lots of stories about many maltreatments of our OFWs. So, for most OFW, it is distressing when they miss important events, special occasions, and not seeing their kids grow up. When working in other countries, they are obliged to learn the language, behavior, and culture of the place they move in, which they gave them hard time to adjust and adapt. Moreover, financial problem is a thing for most OFW because it is really hard to earn and save up since they almost send all of their income to their families back home, neglecting their basic needs while living abroad. OFW make sacrifices just for the sake of their families to live a better life.
Definition of global citizenship. Global citizenship is how we talk about social, environmental, and economical action of people and communities who know that every person is a citizen of the world. It is about how decision in one part of the planet can affect people living in different parts of it. Global citizen is not a new concept, however, it is a modern world. It takes on a new meaning and greater importance than ever before. Global awareness is now the responsibility of all people across the world. Make every decision environmental friendly choices in order to lessen the impact in the world. Learn about culture all over the world and educate yourself about what is going on globally. So, a global citizen is someone who is aware of and understand the wider world and their place in it. The concept is originated in the ancient Greece around the 4th century, and the Greek coined the term cosmopolitan, which means citizen of the world. Through the ages, a world citizen has evolved to being someone who aligned with being worldly, traveling across the globe and embracing diversity, says Micha Emmet. Ethical obligation of global citizenship. The most common definition of a global citizenship is the idea that all people have responsibility to the world rather than just their country and immediate community. Modern globe citizens have ethical responsibility and have a desire to contribute to communities and the world at large in a possible way in order to improve the lives of others. A global citizen also have certain responsibility to our world community, just as citizens do to their local and regional community and countries. Citizens at all levels need to fully fulfill this responsibility if they want healthy, sustainable communities. So a global citizen have a global level responsibilities include the responsibility to understand one's own perspective and those others, to protect the principle of culture diversity, to make connection and build social and working relationship with people from other countries and other culture, to understand the way in which people and countries of the world are interconnected and interdependent, to understand leading global issues and their national impact, and to advocate the practice of global citizenship in their own countries, especially for their implementation of international agreement, convention, and treaties.
What is global migration in a contemporary world? Global migration is a situation in which people live in foreign countries, especially to find work. However, the reasons why people migrate differ depending on an individual situation. How people migrate depends greatly on its nation current immigration laws and safety of the route itself. While some people are able to travel by airplane or train, others do not have the same luxury. Immigrants, when a person freely chooses to move to another place, it might be temporary or permanent, often move to resettle as a family. Why do people move? Global migration can be understood as a cause and effect relationship, though the causes are just numerous as their effect. People move across international borders for a variety of reasons: their safety, the natural disaster, political conflict, education, family, career, and economic betterment. To fulfill a job placement or as a reprieve from situation of injustice and war. Transportation is one of the examples of how migration can take drastically different forms. The push-pull factors. It is a factor in destination country that attracts people to a new place largely because the opportunities presented in the new location were not available to them previously. Example, a family moving from country with minimal job opportunities for a successful career. The beneficial element that the new country presents encourages people to migrate there in order to seek a better life for their families. A push factor refers to a condition which forces people to leave their homes. A person who would typically move because of distress, safety, natural disaster, or political conflict. Places that experience drought and famine, war conflict, and or high unemployment would contribute to the push factors that trigger for that country's residents. Thus, migration improves the quality of life. Whether individuals migrate due to push factors, there are undeniable benefits involved in adapting to a new country. Some benefits are simply fun and exciting. Learning a new culture and experiencing new opportunities such as testing new food and getting to know a different approach to communication.
4 types of global migration. Although migration always involves the movement of a person from one place to another, there can be many reasons for this movement, and many different ways it can occur. This gives rise to different types of global migration. First, the labor migration. Labor migration represents the movement of individuals from one country to another with the purpose of seeking work or responding to recruitment drives in other country. However, in labor migration, it is possible to identify 2 types of migrants: the highly skilled labor and unskilled low-wage labor, including illegal or forced immigrants. So, the highly skilled labor migration. So this represents only a small percentage of migration, and it is the type of migration most demanded by the host countries who develop special types of incentives to attract highly skilled labor. In most cases, countries seek highly skilled workers in certain occupations when there is a shortage. So next is the unskilled low-wage labor migration. So temporary migration is also a characteristic of labor migration, where people migrate for the specific purpose of working. In some cases, people may migrate have low skill levels, leaving them vulnerable to exploitation and human rights violations. In some cases, this migration can be illegal. So the next type of global migration is the forced migration or displacement. Forced migration or displacement is defined as the movement of persons who have been forced or obliged to flee or to leave their homes or places of habitual residences, in particular as a result of or in order to avoid the effects of armed conflict, situations of generalized violence, violations of human rights, or natural or human-made disasters, like limited food production and water insecurity, often exacerbated by climate change.
So human trafficking is also characterized by forced migration. So this migration is a subject to a migratory movement in which an element of coercion exists, including lack of safety like threats to life or persecution, and lack of economic or social opportunities like work or don't have a better school, or whether arising from the natural or man-made causes like movement of refugees, an internally displaced person, as well as people displaced by natural or environmental disasters, or extreme weather like drought, which can affect things like agriculture. Also, the chemical or nuclear disasters, famine, and lastly, the development projects. So the third type of global migration is the international retirement migration, or the IRM. So retired people may have the financial power to buy properties abroad, which can be either a first or a second home. These people put a lot of pressure on urbanization and the mass construction of housing, significantly in coastal and rural areas. So this type of migration can also include people leaving their job and moving to a rural location in another country. So these people basically may telework or set up a business. So these are migrations which are similar but not strictly associated with retirement, since they involve people in mid or late career leaving their jobs and moving to rural areas in other countries. So they may telework or set up businesses, but in essence, they are looking for the same lifestyle as they retires. That is, a less stressful life, a better quality of life, and perhaps the chance to live more cheaply on the same income. And lastly, the internal migration. Separately to international and global migration, this type of migration involves a person moving from one area to another within the same country. So such as from the north of Cebu to south of Cebu. No international borders are crossed. So this type of migration crosses over with rural-urban migration or counter-urbanization. Internal migration or domestic migration within a nation is also known as the human migration. So this migration typically involves moving for economic or educational reasons, or in response to a natural disaster or civil unrest, or in search of better employment or financial prospects, such as the chance to earn more money, and also to have a political conditions, better healthcare, and finally, to have a stability in life.
As the world continues to evolve, people face plenty of challenges in their everyday lives. They are in a battlefield in order to survive in today's crisis. Some of these crises or challenges are poverty, lack of opportunities, and education. People who wants to find and live the life they wanted to, they tend to migrate and try their luck in the other places, and they are called the migrant. They are wishing and hoping that their lives will be good when they transfer to the other country. International migration, of course, when people cross state boundaries, stay in the host state for some minimum length of time. Migration occurs for many reasons. Many people leave their home countries in order to look for economic opportunities in another country. Others migrate to be with family members who have migrated, or because of political conditions in there. Education is another reason for international migration as students pursue their studies abroad. Although this migration is often temporary, with a return to the home country after the studies are completed. According to UNDSA, the definition of an international migrant is a person living outside their country. Migration is often driven by the search for better livelihoods and new opportunities. Indeed, global and regional social and economic inequalities are expressed most powerfully through the figure of the migrant, one who crosses borders in search of work, education, and new horizons. While human mobility has been an enduring feature of our global history, it is as pertinent today as it ever was. With 232 million international migrants in the world, according to recent figures released by United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, or the UND. Migration is one of the most important and pressing global issues of our time. Many people who migrate, however, have not necessarily chosen to do so. Forced migration is becoming ever more prevalent as a result of civil, political, and religious persecution and conflict. In 2012, The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or the UNHCR, estimated that there were 10.4 million refugees in the world. There is moreover a growing need to understand the important relationship between environmental change and forced migration and displacement, and the experiences of stateless persons. Crossing borders and seas involves grave risks, with many migrants not able to complete safe journeys. We can see this most starkly in the numerous tragedies involving migrants that have occurred in recent years. As borders become increasingly securitized, the proliferation of recruitment networks that endanger and profit from migrants, and the increasing use of private migration management agencies in border control and security are worrying trends. This ought to make us reflect urgently on how migration is being governed in the world today and on the responsibilities of states in this regard.
You have obviously thought a lot of immigrating, but have you given much thought to the impact migration has on the country you head to and the country you live? When you take the global population, which is expanding at explosive rate, and economic factors into consideration, you may start to realize that your move has an impact on two countries. This impact can be both negative and positive. The advantages of the receiving countries. There are many arguments about the advantages and disadvantages of migration and how it has affected us locally. The positive impacts or advantages on the receiving or host countries. First, job vacancies and skill gaps can be filled. Economic growth can be sustained. Services to an aging population can be maintained when there are insufficient young people locally. The pension gap can be filled by contributions of new young workers, and they also pay taxes. Immigrants bring energy and innovation. Host countries are enriched by cultural diversity. Failing schools and those with failing numbers can be transformed. Therefore, the advantages of a country receiving immigrants can give substantial economic benefits, a more flexible labor market, a greater skill base, increased demand, and a greater diversity of innovations. The disadvantages of the receiving countries, or the negative impacts or disadvantage of the receiving host countries. First, depression in wages may occur, especially in lower paid jobs. Having worker willing to work for relatively low pay may allow employers to ignore productivity, training, and innovations. Migrants may be exploited. Increases in population can put pressure on public services. Unemployment may rise if there are unrestricted numbers of incomers. There may be integration difficulties and friction with local people. Large movements of people lead to more security monitoring. Ease of movement may facilitate organized crime and people trafficking. So I conclude that the disadvantages of migration in the receiving countries, if there are unending numbers of people are migrating into an area, it can have detrimental consequences like the displacement of jobs, unemployment, and limited access to resources. There are also drawbacks as well, such as increased rates of crimes, health risk, and climate change. The advantages of the sending countries or positive impact of the country's origin. First, developing countries benefit from remittances, such as payments sent home by migrants. This now often outstrip foreign aid. Unemployment is reduced and young migrants enhance their life prospects. And third, returning migrants bring savings, skills, and international contacts. In simply thought, the benefits of the sending countries is one of its element of immigration that is seen to benefit the sending country is the payment of remittances, the sending of money back home. These large transfers of money from the prosperous developed world to the poorer developing world are often viewed as a key to the latter's economic development. And lastly, the disadvantage of the sending countries or its negative impact. First, economic disadvantage through the loss of young workers. Second, loss of highly trained people, especially health workers, and lastly, social problems for children left behind or growing up without a wider family circle.
What is human trafficking? A human trafficking, also known as trafficking in persons. It is a crime that involves compiling or coercing a person to provide labor or services, or to engage in commercial sex acts. The coercion can be subtle or overt, physical or psychological. Exploitation of a minor of commercial sex is human trafficking, regardless of whether any form of force, fraud, or coercion was used. So, in simple words, human trafficking is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people through force, fraud, or deception, with the aim to exploiting them for profit. Men, women, and children of all ages and from all backgrounds can become victims of this crime, which occur in every region of the world. Examples of human trafficking. First is trafficking for forced criminal activities. Second is trafficking in human for sexual exploitation. Third is trafficking for the removal of organs. Fourth is people smuggling. And last is trafficking for forced labor. So for the trafficking for forced criminal activities, this form of trafficking allows criminal networks to reap the profits of a variety of illicit activities without the risk. Victims are forced to carry out a range of illegal activities which in turn generate income. This can include theft, drug cultivation, selling, counterfeit goods, or forced begging. Victims often have quotas can face severe punishment if they do not perform adequately. Trafficking in human for sexual exploitation. This prevalent form of trafficking affects every region in the world, either as a source, transit, or destination country. Women and children from the developing countries and from vulnerable part of society in developed countries are lured by promises of decent employment into leaving their homes and traveling to what they consider will be a better life. Victims are often provided with false travel documents, and an organized network is issued to transport them to the destination country, where they find themselves forced into sexual exploitation and held in human condition and constant terror. So for the trafficking for the removal organs, in many countries, waiting lists for transplant are very long, and criminals have seized this opportunity to exploit the desperation of patients and potential donors. The health of victims, even their lives, it is at risk as operation may be carried out in clandestine condition with no medical follow-up. An aging population and increased incidence of diabetes in many developed countries is likely to increase the requirements for organ transplant and make this crime even more lucrative. So for the people smuggling, closely connected to human trafficking is the issue of people smuggling, as many migrants can fall victim to forced labor along their journey. Smugglers may force migrants to force in human conditions to pay their illegal passage across borders. For the trafficking for forced labor, victims of this widespread form of trafficking come primarily from developing countries. They are recruited and trafficked using deception and coercion and find themselves held in condition of slavery in a variety of jobs. So, victims can be engaged in agricultural, mining, fisheries, or construction worker. along with domestic servitude and other labor-intensive job. So as you can see, there are 5 types of this we call human trafficking. But the only question we had is what foils human trafficking. So according to my research, that the first reason that human trafficking is foiled by a high reward and low risk dynamic. This means that traffickers can expect to make a lot of money with minimal fear of punishment or illegal consequences. It's the second most profitable illegal industry, second only the drug trade. And while drugs are sold in one transactions, human beings can be sold over and over again. The costs are low and the profits are extremely high. Second, human trafficking is fueled by the economic principle of supply and demand. And lastly, systemic inequalities and disparities make certain groups much more vulnerable to exploitation. Mass displacement, conflict, extreme poverty, lack of access to educational and job opportunities, violence, and harmful social norms like child marriage are all factors that push individuals into situations of trafficking. Families living in extremely poverty or families in disparate circumstances are more likely to accept risk job offers. When girls are not allowed to learn, parents are more likely to sell their daughters to men for marriage.
What are the 3 elements of human trafficking? The 3 elements of human trafficking are an act or what is done, the means or how it is done, and exploitative purpose or why it is done. In essence, for human trafficking to occur, a trafficker will 1. Commit or at least one act against another person, such as recruiting. 2. By using at least one means, such as violence. And 3. For the purpose of exploiting that other person for financial gain or material benefits. So, a human trafficking can occur if the 3 elements are there. Act plus means plus purpose is equals to human trafficking. So, here are some examples of act, means, and purposes shown in the table. Element 1. The act or acts of human trafficking or what is done. A person becomes a human trafficker if he or she does any of the following acts for the purpose of exploitation. Recruits another person for the purpose of exploitation. Transport or transfer another person. Transporting involves moving a person to another place in order to exploit them. And transferring occurs when the trafficked person is transferred from one person to another. Harbors or receives another person for the purpose of exploitation. Harboring or receiving occurs when a human trafficker hides or houses a trafficked person and keeps them under control in order to exploit them. Element 2. The means of human trafficking or how it is done. Traffickers use a variety of tactics to get a trafficked person to do what they want and to maintain control, including the use of violence or threat of violence against the person. A trafficker will often use violence or threat of violence as control tactics. Coercion. A traffic may coerce another person through fear such as the fear of being separated from loved ones or losing immigration status. Abduction. Abduction is the act of leading someone away by force or lies. Fraud. In the context of human trafficking, fraud may involve transactions where a trafficker dupes a person into paying for forged or false travel documents in the belief these documents are legitimate in the destination country. The trafficker may also charge an illegal fee for a job that doesn't exist. Deception. A trafficker may deceive a person into being trafficked by telling her that a well-paid job and good working conditions, when in fact she may be exploited for sex and labor. Abuse of power. A trafficker who is in a position of control or authority over another, such as a spouse, a parent, or a teacher, may abuse his or her power to exploit that other person. Element 3. The purpose of exploitation, or why it is done. The purpose or purposes for which traffickers use the people they traffic may vary, but the ultimate goal of all traffickers is the same. They exploit other human beings for profit, which can be a financial gain or material benefit. Traffickers exploit others for a variety of purposes like sexual exploitation. A person trafficked for sexual exploitation is forced to provide sexual acts against their will for the financial benefit or material gain of the trafficker. Forced labor. In the context of human trafficking, a person trafficked for forced labor is made to work for little or no pay, but they forced to return most of it in cash to the trafficker. Domestic servitude. Domestic servitude is a form of forced labor and is defined as slavery. A person trafficked as a domestic servant may be forced to clean the house, to do the laundry, cook meals, maintain the lawns and gardens, and look after the children, elderly, and pets. Forced or coerced organ removal. Kidneys, livers, and heart, in particular, are in high demand around the world for people who need replacement organs, but can't find a legitimate organ donor. The best example of this is people abduct others just to get their organs and sell to black market.